Chapter 1. The Hunters Become the Hunted. What do you do when the story you're chasing starts chasing you back? For most journalists, this question remains theoretical, a distant concern discussed in ethics classes or whispered about in newsroom corners. But, for our podcast crew, it became a terrifying reality that would force them to abandon 4 different homes in a span of months, always looking over their shoulders, always wondering who was watching from the shadows. It started innocuously enough. A simple investigation into one of hip-hop's most powerful figures. Standard procedure, courthouse visits, witness interviews, document reviews. The kind of work that builds careers and wins awards. What they didn't anticipate was how quickly they would become the subjects of their own investigation, prey in a game they didn't even know they were playing. The first sign came during a routine courthouse visit. As our crew set up their equipment outside the imposing stone steps of justice, preparing for another day of coverage, the atmosphere shifted. Something felt wrong. The usual chaos of reporters, lawyers, and curious onlookers seemed different. Somehow, more staged, more deliberate. Then came the man with the 2-4. Picture this. You're focused on your notes, preparing questions for the next witness, when suddenly a stranger emerges from the crowd wielding a wooden plank like a weapon. No warning, no provocation, just pure targeted aggression. The man swung the stick in threatening arcs, his eyes locked on our reporter, with an intensity that suggested this wasn't random street violence. This was personal. This was a message. But who sent it and why? Chapter 2. The Theater of Manufactured Chaos. The courthouse had become a stage, and everyone seemed to be playing a role, except our crew couldn't figure out who had written the script. People began appearing out of nowhere, as if summoned by some invisible director. One moment the steps would be relatively quiet, the next they'd be swarming with individuals who seemed to have no business being there. These weren't typical court observers or legitimate journalists. They moved with purpose, creating disturbances at precisely the moments when real reporting was taking place. The screaming was the worst part. Not the angry shouts of protesters or the emotional outbursts of family members. Those, at least, made sense in context. This was different. Orchestrated chaos designed to disrupt, confuse, and intimidate. Voices would rise from the crowd at crucial moments, drowning out testimony, forcing cameras to stop rolling, making it impossible to conduct proper interviews. Who were these people? Court records showed no indication they had any connection to the case. Background checks revealed nothing. They appeared when needed, performed their disruptive function, then vanished back into the urban landscape as mysteriously as they had emerged. The line between legitimate journalism and performance art began to blur. Real reporters found themselves questioning whether the person standing next to them was actually there to cover the story or to sabotage it. Questions came from supposed journalists that had nothing to do with the case at hand, probing inquiries about podcast revenue, personal backgrounds, family members. These weren't the questions of someone interested in the truth. They were the questions of someone gathering intelligence. Chapter 3. The Eyes That Never Looked Away. But perhaps the most unnerving element of this entire experience was the feeling of being watched not by anonymous strangers in the crowd, but by the subject of their investigation himself. Sean Combs, known to the world as Diddy, seemed acutely aware of their presence. This wasn't the casual acknowledgement of media that most public figures display during legal proceedings. This was something far more intimate and threatening. The eye contact was deliberate, prolonged, and impossible to misinterpret. Across crowded courtrooms, through clusters of lawyers and security personnel, those eyes would find them. And in those moments of connection, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that went beyond the typical dynamic between journalist and subject. It wasn't just the looking, it was the communication. Subtle gestures, slight nods, expressions that seemed to say, "I see you. I know who you are. I know what you're doing." The kind of non-verbal interaction that makes your skin crawl and your instincts scream that you're in danger. How does someone under intense legal scrutiny, surrounded by federal agents and high-powered attorneys, still manage to project such an aura of control and intimidation. How does a man facing serious charges continue to operate as if he's still pulling strings from behind the scenes? Chapter 4. 4 Addresses, Zero Safety. The harassment wasn't confined to public spaces. It followed them home. 4 times they packed their belongings. 4 times they found new apartments, new neighborhoods, new routines. 4 times they hoped they had finally escaped whatever network was tracking their movements. And 4 times they were proven wrong. The pattern was always the same. A few weeks of relative peace, then the signs would return. Unfamiliar cars parked too long on quiet streets. Strangers asking neighbors questions about their work schedules. Phone calls with no one on the other end. The creeping sensation that privacy had become an illusion. Moving became a survival strategy rather than a choice. But how do you outrun an organization with seemingly unlimited resources and reach? How do you hide from people who appear to have access to information that should be confidential? Each relocation brought its own trauma. New security systems, different routes to work, constant vigilance about who might be watching. The psychological toll was immense. Relationships strained, sleep became elusive. And the simple act of leaving the house required military-style planning. Chapter 5. The Voice from Inside the Machine. Then came Capricorn, the witness who would change everything. Capricorn claimed to have worked as Diddy's personal assistant and creative director, positioning her at the very heart of the operation. But this wasn't just another disgruntled employee with an axe to grind. Her testimony carried the weight of someone who had seen behind the curtain, who understood how the machine really worked. Her speaking style was chaotic, yet compelling, the kind of scattered urgency that comes from someone processing trauma while trying to reveal truth. She spoke in fragments, sometimes jumping between topics, but the overall picture she painted was disturbingly coherent. The work environment she described sounded less like an entertainment company and more like a controlled facility. Employees locked in from the outside. Surveillance that went beyond normal workplace monitoring. A culture where questioning authority wasn't just discouraged, it was dangerous. Chapter 6. The Polygraph Marathon. Perhaps the most bizarre element of Capricorn's testimony involved a 5-day polygraph examination, an ordeal that sounded more like psychological torture than standard employment procedure. Picture being hooked up to lie detection equipment for consecutive days, questioned by a stranger whose credentials and motivations remain unclear. Not a law enforcement polygraph administered as part of an official investigation, but a private interrogation designed to ensure absolute loyalty and compliance. What kind of organization requires such extreme measures to maintain employee discipline? What secrets could be so dangerous that they necessitate this level of psychological control? The polygraph marathon wasn't just about testing truthfulness. It was about breaking down psychological barriers, establishing dominance, and ensuring that anyone with access to sensitive information understood the consequences of betrayal. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation disguised as standard business practice. Chapter 7. The NDA Trap. But even more disturbing was Capricorn's revelation about the legal constraints that prevented her from seeking help when she needed it most. Non-disclosure agreements are common in the entertainment industry, typically used to protect trade secrets or prevent the premature release of creative projects. But according to Capricorn, her NDA functioned as something far more sinister, a legal cage that prevented her from reporting potentially criminal activity to law enforcement. Imagine witnessing behavior that you believe crosses legal boundaries, feeling compelled to report it to authorities, but being trapped by a contract that threatens financial ruin or legal retaliation if you speak out. The NDA becomes a weapon, a tool for ensuring silence even in the face of illegal activity. How many other employees signed similar agreements? How many potential witnesses remain silenced by legal documents that prioritize protection of reputation over protection of victims? The NDA system, as Capricorn described it, created a parallel legal universe where normal rules didn't apply and accountability became nearly impossible. Chapter 8. Life Lessons Instead of Overtime. The working conditions Capricorn described painted a picture of an organization that operated by its own rules, completely divorced from standard employment law. Over time, a basic worker protection in virtually every legitimate business was replaced with mandatory life lessons. These weren't motivational seminars or professional development workshops. They were indoctrination sessions designed to ensure complete psychological submission to Diddy's authority. The message was clear. Your time belongs to the organization. Your thoughts belong to the organization. Your loyalty must be absolute, and questioning any aspect of the operation is not just discouraged, it's impossible within the system that's been created. These life lessons served multiple purposes. They normalized excessive work hours without compensation. They reinforced the power dynamic between Diddy and his employees. And they created a shared psychological experience that bonded workers to the organization while isolating them from outside perspectives that might encourage them to question what they were experiencing. Chapter 9. The Kid Cudi Threat. But perhaps the most chilling moment in Capricorn's testimony involved her description of Diddy's reaction to learning about Cassie's relationship with Kid Cudi. According to Capricorn, Diddy's anger transcended normal jealousy or professional rivalry. She claimed he expressed explicit intentions to kill Kid Cudi, not metaphorically, not as an empty threat made in the heat of emotion, but as a genuine plan that reflected his belief that he had the power and resources to eliminate perceived threats to his control. This wasn't just about romantic jealousy. It was about ownership control and the terrifying conviction that certain people were property rather than autonomous individuals with the right to make their own choices. The casual nature with which such threats were allegedly made, discussed in front of employees as if they were routine business decisions, suggests an organization where violence wasn't an aberration, but a standard tool for maintaining power and control. Chapter 10. The Credibility Paradox. What made Capricorn's testimony so compelling wasn't its polish or consistency, but its raw, unfiltered authenticity. Her delivery was chaotic, jumping between time frames, mixing emotional responses with factual recollections, sometimes contradicting minor details from earlier statements. In a court of law, such inconsistencies might undermine credibility. But for anyone listening carefully, the chaos felt genuine rather than rehearsed. Trauma doesn't organize itself neatly for public consumption. Real experiences of abuse and intimidation don't unfold in chronological order with perfect recall of every detail. The messiness of Capricorn's testimony actually enhanced its believability. It sounded like someone processing genuine experiences rather than someone reciting a prepared script. Her body language, emotional responses, and the specific details she provided created a picture that was difficult to dismiss as fabrication. Even when minor contradictions emerged, the overall narrative maintained its internal logic and emotional consistency. Chapter 11. The Rico Connection. Then came the bombshell revelation from an unexpected source. Suge Knight, speaking from prison, Knight allegedly revealed that Capricorn's compensation was being paid by a record label, a detail that suddenly cast her testimony in an entirely different light. Was she a genuine whistleblower, courageously exposing criminal behavior? Or was she a paid performer in a larger legal strategy? The timing of this revelation was particularly significant. RICO investigations designed to prosecute organized criminal enterprises require evidence of ongoing criminal activity conducted through legitimate business operations. Capricorn's testimony provided exactly the kind of insider perspective that federal prosecutors need to build such cases. But if her testimony was financially motivated rather than conscience-driven, what did that mean for its reliability? Could someone be both a paid witness and a truth-teller? Could the record label payment be seen as compensation for taking genuine risks rather than payment for fabricated testimony? Chapter 12. The Power and Control Matrix. Stepping back from individual testimonies and specific incidents, a larger pattern emerges, one that reveals the sophisticated machinery of power and control that allegedly operates behind the glamorous facade of the entertainment industry. The various elements described by witnesses and observed by our podcast crew don't exist in isolation. The courthouse intimidation, the workplace psychological control, the legal constraints that prevent reporting, the surveillance and harassment of journalists. These form an interconnected system designed to maintain power while avoiding accountability. This isn't just about one powerful individual behaving badly. It's about an entire ecosystem that enables, protects, and perpetuates abusive behavior by making it nearly impossible for victims to seek help or for journalists to expose the truth. The system works by attacking credibility, isolating victims, creating legal barriers to reporting, and intimidating anyone who attempts to investigate or expose wrongdoing. It's a masterclass in how power protects itself in modern America. Chapter 13. The Lawyer's Chess Game. Throughout the legal proceedings, attorneys on both sides engaged in a careful dance around the most explosive details of witness testimony. Defense lawyers challenged specific claims while avoiding direct confrontation with the most damaging allegations. Prosecution attorneys built their case methodically, allowing witness testimonies to create a cumulative impression rather than relying on any single devastating revelation. The legal maneuvering revealed just how much was at stake for everyone involved. This wasn't just about individual criminal charges, it was about exposing an entire system of operation that, if proven in court, could implicate numerous other individuals and organizations. The careful way lawyers approached certain topics suggested they understood the broader implications of the case. Every question, every objection, every strategic decision was made with the awareness that this trial could reshape how the entertainment industry operates and how powerful individuals are held accountable for their actions. Chapter 14. The Journalist's Dilemma. For our podcast crew, the experience raised fundamental questions about the nature of investigative journalism in an era where the subjects of investigation have unprecedented resources and reach. How do you maintain objectivity when you become the target of the story you're trying to tell? How do you continue reporting when your safety and that of your family may be at risk? How do you distinguish between legitimate sources and planted disinformation designed to mislead your investigation? The traditional boundaries between journalist and subject, observer and participant began to break down as the crew found themselves not just reporting on a story, but living inside it. They were no longer just documenting events, they had become players in a larger game whose rules they didn't fully understand. Chapter 15. The Truth Behind the Performance. As the various threads of this investigation began to weave together, a disturbing picture emerged of an entertainment industry where the line between performance and reality had been deliberately blurred. The courthouse chaos, the orchestrated harassment, the psychological control of employees, all of these elements suggested an organization that understood the power of performance as a tool for manipulation and control. Reality had become another stage, and everyone involved was playing roles in a script written by unseen hands. But whose performance was genuine and whose was manufactured? How could anyone distinguish between authentic witnesses sharing real experiences and paid performers delivering scripted testimony? In a world where reality itself had become a commodity to be manipulated, how could truth survive? Chapter 16. The Network's Reach. The sophistication of the surveillance and harassment campaign against our podcast crew suggested resources and coordination that went far beyond what any individual, regardless of wealth and power, could typically mobilize. The ability to track their movements across multiple relocations, to coordinate disruptions at public events, to plant questionable individuals among legitimate journalists. These capabilities implied a network with access to professional surveillance resources, legal expertise, and financial backing that rivaled government agencies. Who else was involved in maintaining this system? How many other individuals and organizations had a vested interest in preventing certain truths from emerging? The investigation had uncovered not just individual wrongdoing, but what appeared to be an entire infrastructure designed to protect powerful interests from accountability. Chapter 17. The Psychological Warfare. Perhaps the most insidious aspect of the campaign against our investigators was its psychological sophistication. This wasn't crude intimidation or simple threats. It was psychological warfare designed to undermine confidence, create paranoia, and ultimately destroy the investigators' ability to function effectively. The constant relocations weren't just about physical safety. They were about creating a state of perpetual instability that would make it difficult to maintain focus on the investigation. The courthouse disruptions weren't just about preventing coverage. They were about creating doubt about what was real and what was manufactured. The campaign seemed designed to make the investigators question their own perceptions, to wonder if they were seeing patterns that didn't really exist, to gradually lose confidence in their ability to distinguish between genuine threats and imagined dangers. Chapter 18: The Industry's Silence. Throughout this entire ordeal, one of the most telling aspects was the response, or lack thereof, from the entertainment industry itself. Where were the industry organizations condemning the harassment of journalists? Where were the other powerful figures speaking out against the alleged abuses? Where were the industry publications investigating these claims with the same vigor they typically apply to less powerful targets? The silence was deafening and revealing. It suggested an industry that understood the implications of these allegations all too well, and had made a collective decision that protecting powerful interests was more important than protecting vulnerable individuals or supporting press freedom. Chapter 19: The Federal Response. As the investigation continued and evidence mounted, federal law enforcement agencies began to take notice. The patterns described by witnesses and experienced by journalists aligned with the kind of organized criminal activity that RICO statutes were designed to address. But federal investigations moved slowly, and in the meantime, the alleged harassment and intimidation continued. Witnesses remained vulnerable, journalists continued to face threats, and the system that enabled these behaviors remained largely intact. The federal response raised its own questions. How long had authorities been aware of these allegations? What had prevented earlier intervention? Were there political or economic considerations that influenced the timing and scope of federal involvement? Chapter 20: The Larger Questions. As this investigation revealed layer after layer of alleged corruption, control, and criminal behavior, it forced a confrontation with larger questions about power, accountability, and justice in modern America. How did we create a system where individuals could accumulate enough power and resources to operate essentially above the law for extended periods? How do we balance the legitimate privacy and security needs of wealthy individuals with the public's right to know about potential criminal behavior? How do we protect whistleblowers and journalists in an environment where those they investigate have access to sophisticated surveillance technology, unlimited legal resources, and apparent willingness to use both in service of maintaining their power? Chapter 21: The Ongoing Mystery. Even as federal charges were filed and public attention focused on the allegations, many questions remained unanswered. The full scope of the alleged criminal enterprise, the complete list of victims, the total number of individuals involved in enabling and protecting the operation, all of these elements remained shrouded in mystery. Our podcast crew continued their investigation, but under fundamentally changed circumstances. They had learned to assume they were being watched, to vary their routines, to question the motivations of everyone they encountered. The story had changed them as much as they had uncovered it. Epilogue: The story that never ends. As federal prosecutors prepared their case and defense attorneys mounted their response, one thing became clear: this was not a story with a neat conclusion. The allegations revealed systemic problems that extended far beyond any individual defendant. The entertainment industry's power structures, the legal system's ability to hold wealthy defendants accountable, the media's capacity to investigate powerful targets without becoming targets themselves. All of these institutions faced fundamental challenges revealed by this investigation. For our podcast crew, the experience had transformed from a professional assignment into a personal survival story. They had set out to document potential criminal behavior and discovered they were living inside a larger system designed to prevent exactly the kind of accountability they were trying to provide. The courthouse steps where it all began continue to host daily proceedings, with their familiar cast of lawyers, journalists, and curious observers. But now our crew understood that some of those familiar faces were playing roles in a performance designed to obscure rather than reveal truth. The investigation continues, but it does so with the understanding that in a world where reality itself can be manufactured and performed, the search for truth becomes both more important and more dangerous than ever before. The machine that watches back is still operating, still adapting, still protecting the interests it was designed to serve. But now, at least we know it exists. And knowing, as they say, is the first step toward change. Whether that change will come through federal prosecution, industry reform, or media exposure remains to be seen. But one thing is certain: the story is far from over, and the truth, however elusive, continues to fight for its own survival in the shadows of power. The question that remains is not whether justice will ultimately prevail, but whether we as a society have the courage and determination to confront the systems that make such alleged abuses possible in the first place. The answer to that question will determine not just the outcome of this particular case, but the future of accountability itself in America.